Bobby Halton is nothing if not authentic and genuine. As the Education Director for one of the world's largest fire and first responder shows, he is front and center and is considered by many as the face of the event. Each year in the spring, in the great city of Indianapolis, Clarion Events Group holds their annual FDIC, the Fire Department Instructors Conference. Each and every year, except for this year, about 45,000 firefighters ascend on Indy and the areas surrounding her, and they train hard in classrooms and in real-life death-defying scenarios. I mean, they burn down buildings, well, they put them out too, crawl through tight smoky spaces, dangle from ropes, and cut apart cars, all under the auspices of learning their craft and practicing and rehearsing for their real world. These hardy people come to learn, and some learn so they can, in turn, teach others. And a lot of them come to hear Bobby Halton's always emotional and poignant Opening Ceremonies speech. I've worked this show since 2005, and it's unlike any other show I work on. The attendees, as well as the presenters and the instructors, are the toughest of the tough. But they're also the most compassionate, down-to-earth, and respectful people on the planet. There's bagpipes, and pageantry, and prayers, and when we honor those who have fallen, you can hear a pin drop, and multiple tears drop too. Every one of these people would run into a burning building to save a stranger, and that says everything you need to say. Just the logistics of this show are mind-boggling, and most of the time on site we joke and say we're constantly trying to put out fires. Well, this show takes that concept to a whole other level. So even though I've worked with Bobby on this show for the past decade and a half, there's not a lot of time for chit-chat because, well, you know, fires. So I wanted to get to know him a little better, have you get to know him, and find out more about what makes him tick, and how, as a keynoter, he prepares for such an emotionally and physically jam-packed week. He's not a spring chicken anymore. Hey, but none of us are. But he's got the energy and the grit and the spirit of a lot of guys half his age. I bring you the face of FDIC, Chief Bobby Halton.
Playback ending in 5.
Stand by fake music, stand by talent.
3, 2, 1. Clear.
Music go. Talent go. Welcome to Event Yak, where event pros share their stories about the past, present, and future. I'm your host, Terri Walters. We have with us today Chief Bobby Halton. Thank you for being with us on Event Yak, Bobby.
Thank you, Terry.
I'm glad we were able to connect. It's unfortunate we were not able to connect for your amazing show this year, FDIC. You and me and our dear mutual friend Rob Maloney from Coolwater Multimedia all get together once a year for a little show in Indianapolis.
This is true.
Yep, I'm very sad. Now, we've been doing that show for almost, I guess, about 13 or 14 years now.
This would have been our 15th.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 2005 was our first one, so 15, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's an amazing thing. What a great, great show. But you are the editorial director for Clarion. That's a company that now does the show. And actually, what is the name of the show? It's FDIC, but what does that actually stand for?
Well, two things. I'm the editorial director for Clarion Fire Rescue Group, which is Clarion's a very large corporation. So the Fire Rescue Group encompasses Fire Engineering magazine, which is a 144-year-old trade publication for the fire service, Fire Rescue magazine, which is similar but much younger, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services, which is again younger but caters to the EMS side of our industry, and then Firefighter Nation and Fire Apparatus Emergency Equipment, which is a magazine which is devoted strictly to the interest in tools and equipment and things like that. So those magazines very loosely fall under my editorial direction, which it sounds like a big deal, but it's really not. I've got really absolutely incredible folks that really do all the heavy lifting, and I just get to take all the credit. So, it's a lovely situation for me. And then FDIC, as you just mentioned, that's the show we do together every year that you alluded to earlier with our dear friend Rob Maloney. And that stands for the Fire Department Instructors Conference, which is kind of fun because every now and then you'll be walking around with a shirt or a jacket that says FDIC on it, and folks will say, "Are you a banker?" And of course I say, "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" Yeah.
That's funny. I get that too, but not anymore. I mean, FDIC to me always means the fireman show for us. The one show that is just so different for us and so exciting for us to participate in. So the show is in Indianapolis. Has it always been there?
No, it has not. Now FDIC, I believe this is our 95th year. It started in 1928. Which is fascinating when you think about it, right? 1929 wasn't exactly a banner year for the country, and then the subsequent Great Depression, which FDIC survived through. And what it began as, Terry, was a bunch of firefighters who were instructors running training academies and whatnot across the United States, just very informally decided to get together. And back then, informal was a lot more formal than informal is today, if that makes sense to you in the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back then it was all men, so I apologize in advance for saying, the gentleman involved, but it was all men, as most industry was. And so they wrote papers about different innovations and things they had done. And if you remember in 1928, the world was changing. There was still a lot of use of horses in various industry, although most of them had been phased out for power-driven apparatus, whether it was steam or electric or gasoline-powered. So that was happening. Also, water delivery systems were becoming much more sophisticated. If you think that we finally had hydroelectric power was really the primary driver, but now you had infrastructure being developed to where the older systems that were predicated on people shuttling water were now being replaced by very efficient hydrogen systems. And so you had the era of the high rises being built. You had all kinds of things happening, which I find fascinating because every generation feels as if change has never been so fast as it is right now during our time. Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Think back to when the printing press first started rolling off, things that folks could read. You want to talk about a game changer, right? Because heretofore everything was oral tradition, very slow moving. Now suddenly the masses had access to information and they had access to things like that. And then just pick any time period, and humanity has always been, moving along. And obviously there were ebbs and flows in it, obviously, and technologically, we now have this great internet thing. But what I find fascinating is we've never been more literate and illiterate at the same time, right? Like more people can read and less people do.
Yes.
And very few people do it well, because you have to remember that years ago, that's all folks had, and then radio came along and television and such. But when folks had to read, they read very critically and they read very carefully. And they were very precise, not only in what they read, but what they wrote. So when you go back and read people like Frost and Shelley, and you read people who, even, if you read political documents like the old gazettes and newspapers, or you go back to Thomas Paine, who was one of the original writers here for the United States. But Tom Paine earned his living in England writing ditties for politicians, like, vote for old Sam Green because Sam Green is mean and we need mean Green, that kind of nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how people campaigned back then. So it's exciting to watch, for me, the evolution of these vehicles that provide information and thought to people, and how they're starting to combine the written word with the video, with the audio, as we're doing right now. Years ago, this might have been an interview. You'd sit down and say, I'm writing this for whatever. Rolling Stone, I guess, would be the moniker that a lot of people would realize that absolutely worthless piece of garbage. And I can say that with reckless abandon because I hate that publication. Always have. Always found it to be just vapid by and large. So anyway, it would be like you'd be writing this up, right? 30
Right.
years ago. If we went back even further, it may have been a grander thing for a book, and then if you went back even further, it may have been an early radio show, and it's just exciting to watch how they're all media's all kind of become jumbled together, and just so people know, and it's always been hyper partisan, and people don't understand that either. They think that there's always been this, not till, I'm going to screw up the name, Walter Winchell, I believe it was. He was the guy who came up with the journalist creed. He never had a college degree, but he found the Missouri School of Journalism. And that Missouri School of Journalism is where you get that journalistic creed that's supposed to be non-biased, which, yeah, good luck with that. Because in the history of mankind, everything is biased. I mean, there's a bias for everything, which is fine. Just back then, people admitted it.
Right.
If you were a shameless ideologue, like I am, I'm a shameless ideologue. I'm a pro-America, pro-God, freedom lunatic, and I make no apologies for it. I'm unapologetically patriotic. I'm unapologetically Christian. I'm unapologetically Roman Catholic, actually, which is even worse than Christian. It's like hyper-partisan Christianity. But I also love the Christian church. I love them both. And then I'm unapologetically a constitutionalist. I really believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that goes along with it. And when we're talking about the show, which is odd way to get back to it.
I knew we'd get back.
Well, as the editorial director, I think it's important to know where someone is coming from and what anyone who tells you they're trying to just get the facts out there is lying to you, because we all have an agenda. We all have a bias, and that's okay.
So, fire engineering, I mean, they're there to get information out to firefighters and educate people and things like that. That's kind of been their creed from the very beginning, and it kind of continues through. And the evolution of the show is something that's relatively new, I would think, where especially the size of it. Like, how big is FDIC? And we call it FDIC International now, but I call it FDIC. So
yeah, FDIC, 44,000 people last year.
Wow.
Which is amazing. And that encompasses the folks that just came for the exhibits as well, and the students. And so there's the attendees that attended classes, and that includes hands-on training as well as the classrooms and the workshops, and which is really exciting. And
yeah, I mean, paint a little bit of a picture of the event for me and like what the components are. Like you mentioned the exhibits. To me, I mean, that's like the most impressive, or one of the most impressive pieces of the show is the exhibits.
That is pretty phenomenal. So the show starts off on Monday morning, first day, and that's all hands-on training and workshops. So we have about 90 workshops going on, or 45 each day, and they're 4 hours long. And so over the 2 days of pre-con, which is Monday, Tuesday, there are 90 of these workshops, which we call it sit on your ass training, SOT. And then there's HOT, which is outside, and that's hands-on training. So the hands-on is actually this year it was going to be about 25 sites, and it's everything from junkyards to homes that we acquire to schools to high-rise buildings where we recreate fire service activities. Things that the firefighters have to do in the real world, whether it's rescuing people from cars or getting them out of burning buildings or searching for them in burning buildings or managing high-rise extrications with ropes, elevator rescues. So it runs the gamut from soup to nuts of hands-on training. And that's a phenomenal thing to see. About 400 folks or so help to support that. There are between 60 and 80 coaches, buses, full-size buses that carry 55 students each. One of the buses this year was actually going to go all the way to Champaign, Illinois, to use a training facility there to run some training that we're going to be doing in Champaign, Illinois. We'll be doing that in 2021. But most of them stay within the greater Indianapolis area, a radius of about 40 or 50 miles. But we were going to go all the way out about 160 miles this year to Champaign, Illinois, which is pretty cool when you think about it, right?
Wow.
And we do this hands-on training. On Wednesday is where you play a major role, and Terri and Diane and Rob and his crew all come in, and we do what's called the main program, the opening ceremonies, and that encompasses, I don't know how many bagpipers and drummers we bring in, but the pipes and drums, which is usually 60 or 80 guys and gals, right?
Yeah, they're I think at last count, it's a massed band, and shout out to the FDIC massed piper band here. Just
we call
giving
it the
you a shout
Renegade
out.
Band.
There you go. And so we appreciate all you do on this show. But yeah, there's like 80, I would say, about that come in. They practice, I kind of talk with them a little bit along the way, and they all are so serious and so happy to do such a great job for the show. But that's one of the things that really adds and makes the show so special for me is the kind of, and I don't want to call it pomp and circumstance, but that's kind of what it is. That's what makes the show different.
Well, that's exactly what it is, and that's an okay term too, right? Like pomp and circumstance used to be a set of courtesies and customs that you would afford different people because of their current stature in the system, right? And whether it's piping on the captain on a ship, or whether it's, recognizing the President of the United States with Hail to the Chief, or the Queen of England, whatever, and or the graduating class, right? There was a set of things that happened which are important, and that goes to the basis of what you do for us at FDIC. See, all of those things are really, really important to me, and part of what you wanted me to talk about is what is it like to be the guy on the stage as well as the guy behind putting the stage together.
Right.
And all of that matters. See, people nowadays, it's a throwaway society. Everybody thinks that anything that wasn't invented yesterday on some podcast by some postmodernist nitwit who was taking, gender studies or what some other make-believe psychology program at Brown, God bless him, some 24-year-old knucklehead who knows nothing about the real world. If they didn't come up with it yesterday, then it's not worth talking about. But the problem with that is that ancient wisdom that's endured for thousands upon thousands of years is just that, wisdom. All the rest of it's just interesting. It's anecdotal. And quite frankly, I don't give a, can I say crap?
Sure.
Oh, well, good. I don't give a crap about what some graduate student from, I don't care, Harvard or any place else thinks about anything until they have a little skin in the game, until they have some bumps and bruises, until they've been rode hard and put up wet. Because that's the real world, boys and girls. Yogi Berra said it best. They tell me in theory that this should work in practice, but in practice it doesn't. So there you go. The problem with the academics, to quote Nassim Taleb, he says that academics think the academia and the real world are the same thing. In the real world, they're not. And he kind of paraphrased that off of Yogi's line, and Yogi probably stole it off of somebody else. But that's ancient wisdom, right? You can sit in the puzzle palace and come up with a plan, and the plan is just that. It's a plan. When it meets the real world, all bets are off. It's the old line, everybody's got a, Mike Tyson said it best. Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan till I punch him in the face. And so, and that's important to remember. So one of the things that we do at FDIC is the first 2 days are about the real world. That's the real world. When you're out there doing those things and those drills and the hands-on training, you can't tell people it'll work this way. It either works or it doesn't work. There's objective reality, right? The postmodernists, whether you want to talk about Lyotard or, Foucault or Derrida, they all talk about, reality is what it is to the individual, and you can imagine yourself as a transgendered zebra from the Pacific Islands. Yeah, well, good luck with that. You're still Harvey from West Brooklyn. You know what I mean? So get over yourself, Harvey. You're not a giraffe. You're not a parakeet in the rainbow forest of Narnia. No, dude, you're Harvey from Brooklyn. So there's reality, right? We deal with reality the first 2 days, and then we bust out into theory, right? Like, wouldn't this be nice to try? Or this is what we're doing here. And that's what the classroom stuff's about. So the main program has a couple of key components to me that are really important. The first one is just setting the tone. And that's what the national anthem does. And that's what the posting of the colors does. That's pomp and circumstance. And make no mistake about it. And they're posted correctly. And they're sung correctly for a reason. There's a reason why it's done exactly correctly. And then the pipes and drums. That's meant to start connecting you. Music connects you in ways that are almost indescribable.
Yeah, emotionally,
intellectually.
Yeah.
And that music, that roar, that energy, those of the drums and the bagpipes wailing. Bagpipes were meant for warfare, and they would intimidate the enemy. And it's like somebody torturing 10,000 cats at once. They mean business, right? So you've got these bagpipes wailing and these drums blaring, and the colors being posted, and then a prayer, and that's an interesting break. There's got to be that break, because anytime you face a threat in the real world, first we catastrophize it. In other words, it's bigger than anything we've ever seen. It's overwhelming. That's the pipes and drums. That's the music. Oh my God, we're going, for lack of a better word, to war. We're going to go face the enemy. We get it. This is life and death, because that's what we do. We do life and death. We don't do computer programming. We don't do, and no disrespect to the people who do that. We don't do banking. We do life and death, different arena. And I'm not saying it makes us better or worse than. We're the guys that were in shop class. We're the recreation majors of the world. We're real simple men and women who just dig the hell out of helping people. We're the people who read Rick Viktor's Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and in German I think it's called From Auschwitz to Existentialism, and said, yeah, that's me. I want to help people find their purpose in life. I find meaning in helping other people find meaning. That's what Frankl discovered, right? So all that music builds that up inside of you. Then we bring the padre out, or the rabbi or whatever. We have a padre, Father John Carney. He's a retired 82nd Airborne Ranger, retired a light bird out of Korea. And now he's a Catholic priest, so do that math. This guy's killed more people than he's ever saved, guaranteed. He did 2 tours of Nam, so this is no shrinking violet. He wasn't a priest in Vietnam. He didn't become a priest till he got out of the military. So he was an airborne ranger, no fear of danger. This is a badass son of a gun. So anyway, he gives the prayer. Why is that important? Because before every threat, there's an instant when you realize you're up against a threat, and you stop for a second. We all do. If you got a sense in your head, there's a moment of clarity that tells you got to be right. And so the prayer is that instant where you realize that every day, if you're carrying a grudge with somebody, or you're doing somebody wrong, or you're sideways with the world, you got to get right. And you can't always do it face to face, but at least you can do it in your heart and your head. You know what I mean? And that's what the prayer is about. It's about, and for the religious among us, it's about thanking God and getting your head right, right? And then we have the skipper's fight talk, which is another custom and courtesy. It's more pomp and circumstance. And the job of that person, which is me, is to go out and identify the threat in some way, identify how others have met it and how they thought about it, and then make it real for us. And it involves screaming and yelling and history and, raving and howling at the moon, which you helped me do. And it's not a trivial thing. It's an important thing, because we've set everybody up with music. We've set everybody up with, a moment of reflection. And then we need to let them know that everyone has it within themselves to conquer anything. There's nothing that the human spirit can't defeat individually, in groups. There's nothing. I don't care what the threat is, whether it's the tyranny of the Japanese at the time, who were just barbaric. I mean, they were unbelievable. You read The Rape of Nanking, and if that doesn't make you feel ill, then you have no emotion whatsoever. What they did is they were trying to really just take over the world. Basically, is what they were trying to do. The barbarism of it was amazing. People focus all the time on Hitler and what he did in Auschwitz and the concentration camps and what he did to the poor Jewish people, and rightfully so. But when you look at what the Japanese did in their reign of terror, what they did in Korea and what they did in China, my God, it almost pales in comparison. It's almost reminiscent of what Stalin did, when he did the purges and he rounded up the farmers and sent them off to the gulags, and what he did in the Ukraine, starving those people. The horror of it is amazing. When you think that the people in the Ukraine were so desperate that they were screaming to get into the gulags for food, that's how desperate they were. So you need to have a fight talk that reminds you that even in the darkest moment, good will win. Virtue will win. And it gets dark sometimes. So you've got to, and in firefighting, it happens all the time. Oftentimes the crew will find themselves outgunned, outmatched in a building that's fallen down all around them. They've got to believe in themselves to the point to where they know that their training, that their skill set, that their ability to trust one another and depend on one another is going to somehow get them out of there. And if it doesn't, they're willing to accept that because they had that moment of reflection. But they have a purpose for being there, and that purpose for being there undoubtedly was to save a human life, or to find out if there was human life to save. We don't throw our lives away. We don't spend this divinity lightly. We make sure it comes at a dear cost. So that's what the fight talk is about. And then you follow that up with the usual awards and gratuities, again, pomp and circumstance. And then you follow it up with a keynote. So you bring out someone who's a leader in the industry, who's got a message to send, that's got some kind of intellectual standing, as well as street cred. Street cred's always important. And then you go out and you save the world.
That is an awesome picture. I mean, it's so emotional, and it just, for me, especially calling a show like that, sitting in the back of the room and seeing, we get about 3,500 people in into the convention center, and to see guys and ladies, guys and gals like that with tears in their eyes is just such a touching thing for me. I don't experience that a lot in the events business.
But we did have one thing we have to correct that you do, though, Terry, and this comes from Father John. We were going through the run of the program, and it said VOG, and that's you, voice of God.
That is correct.
And he was going to point out, no, that's him. He's the voice of God. You get to be something else.
Oh, now we're gonna have to make a couple of changes.
Yeah, the voice of Terry.
The voice of Terry.
Your conscience.
They call me the voice of goddess sometimes, so I don't know.
That's pretty. I thought that was funny, though. I had to share
it is. I love.
Hey, that's my job.
I love Father John. He's the best. You talk about preparation, and as a firefighter, and I want to talk about a little bit later. You being a firefighter, but I still want to stay in this vein. I think that you're probably one of the best prepared speakers and best rehearsed speakers before you even get to us, because we come at the back end. How do you get to that point?
You mean, how do I prepare to give a talk?
Yeah. I mean, how do you pick a subject? Because every year you have a different kind of specific subject or specific story that you tie into it. How do you do that?
They all have to do with virtue, and they all have to do with, for lack of a better word, courage, which Aristotle clearly pointed out, that courage is the first of the virtues, because without courage, none of the others could exist. Because all of the virtues involve either denying yourself some type of pleasure or opportunity, or putting yourself second, or discipline. That's what virtue is in a nutshell. So I always start there, and I try to find some issue that the fire service, whether it's cancer, whether it's staffing, whether it's
I know mental health was one at one point.
Right?
Yep.
And it was interesting because last year we had a really interesting one, because I did the compilation, and I found a great quote from Robert Copeland, who was the commander of the Roberts in World War II. His quote was, so it was Leyte Gulf, and Admiral Halsey had gone off to chase a feint that the Japanese had, and the Japs were coming down with this gigantic armada, the largest armada ever assembled. And Copeland was Samuel B. Roberts. That was the name of his ship, Samuel B. Roberts. And so anyway, he's this little tiny destroyer escort, pipsqueak of a ship compared to the Japanese put together this armada of the largest collection of ships ever, the most powerful, most advanced. And these 13 little ships were left behind to guard MacArthur, who was offloading all of his troops to retake the Philippines, right? So their job was critical. And Halsey thought for sure he was going after the main body, but the main body was actually coming down right on top of these little third. Copeland turns his ship, along with another guy, Ernest Evans, who was a Native American guy. They called him Chief. He was a Native American guy. He went to the Annapolis, and he was in charge of the Johnson. The Johnson and the Roberts turned simultaneously and attack this armada. So it would be, okay, imagine if the Chicago Bears or the New York Giants were coming down the road, and two 5-year-old boys on their bicycles got on their bicycles and said, we're going to take those guys on, and put a football under their arms and ran as hard as they could and charged the New York Giants. That's about the equal.
Okay.
Roberts, looking at this, said to his men, got on the PA and said, we are facing overwhelming odds from which survival is not to be expected. We will do what damage we can. That's the mission. He was telling his men, and he knew he'd probably die. And this is a guy who's 33 years old. Most of the folks on that ship were probably, 22, 19, and they turned that ship and they attacked. Now he survived. Copeland survived. I think 120 or so, 150 or so of the men on that ship perished. The ship was sunk, as was the Johnson, and Evans was killed. But when you think about that, we are facing overwhelming odds. We will do what damage we can. Man, that I built a whole talk around that.
Right.
So this year I chose another quote, which I thought was beautiful. It was by one of my favorite authors, Elizabeth Elliot. And she said, there's nothing worth living for unless it's worth dying for. And then you can go all over the place with that.
Right.
Right. And so part of my technique is finding those moments in time where someone had so much clarity that they saw life in all its struggles, because it's fascinating to me. We've convinced people that life is about happiness. No, it's not. If you think life's about happiness, you're a moron. Life is about struggle. Life is about challenges. And if you don't think that everybody is facing something, you're a nitwit. And if you think that life is, I'm going to be so happy and I'm going to be hanging out in the coffee shop with Rachel and whatever those other idiots were on that television show, and we're going to drink coffee all day and sleep with one another, that's not the real world. First of all, the minute you sleep with your friend's girlfriend, he's going to kick your butt, or she's going to kick your butt. But you're going to get your butt kicked. Nobody on that show ever got their butt kicked. And they need some butt kicking to make that show real. So anyway, we deal in the real world with real problems in real time. And oftentimes it costs us our lives. And we don't have any power, which is fascinating, Terry, which makes the fire service so unique and why I love being part of it. In other words, we don't bring guns. We bring water. We can't arrest you. We can only rescue you. We can't we can't make you wear a face mask, or anything like that. We don't wield power over anyone, and that's an important part of who we are, and that's why people trust us. And that trust is not something that I take lightly or would ever screw around with. I think that those that do run tremendous moral hazard. There's a problem with that, and I I often wanted to take our fire marshal's office and dissociate it from the fire service, from anyway my departments, because I felt that the men and women in there who needed to carry guns because they were dealing with bad guys who lit fires walk that fine line between who we are and who we aren't, right? And I get it. We need to have those folks, those investigators, but I kind of dig the systems where they leave the law enforcement side of it up to the coppers, you know what I mean? Where they go and they do the investigation, but they let the coppers do the, go arrest the bad guy stuff. And God bless them for doing that. That's a whole different world. It's not my world. But the neat thing about FDIC is that most of the cats that are there, really don't have any power. I don't have any power. Which is kind of a great way to live. You know what I mean? It's like people always say, "Oh, it must be great to be so influential." I'm like, I've never influenced anybody. You know what I mean? Everybody has it within themselves to be influenced, but it's not by other people. It's by their worldview, right? Paul Simon said it better than anybody. A man hears what he wants to hear, and he disregards the rest. So if it's in you, you'll hear it from a song. If it's in you, you'll see it in the sunrise. If it's in you, you'll hear it in a sermon. Like, I wish I could have been in the time when Whitfield and I'm trying to think of the other preacher, Witherspoon. So when America was first being founded, there was this incredible preacher. It was long before the American Revolution, who came to America from England, and he was the first preacher who really talked about the fact that everybody was equal. That the kings weren't any better than anybody else, that the clergy wasn't any better than anybody else. He was even more eloquent about it than Martin Luther. Martin Luther was just against the corruption in the church. Martin Luther really believed in a hierarchy. But this cat was like, no, dude, we're all sinners, we're all dopes, we're all. And what was interesting, Ben Franklin, as a younger man, went to hear him speak. It was a quasi fan of him. The guy was an incredible speaker. And he said, in a crowd of 20,000 people, and remember, there's no microphones back then. You could hear him as if he was standing next to you. That's amazing. That means that people were hardly breathing when he spoke.
Right.
I mean, everyone was transfixed. The world stood still when this man shared his energy with the world. And he was a preacher. Obviously, he's probably spreading a Christian message. But that Christian message to him was, there might be a hierarchy in the fire service, chiefs, captains, lieutenants. There might be a hierarchy in government, the president, senators, congress people, whatever. There might be a hierarchy in event management, right? The coordinator, the blah, 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 blah. There's all kinds of dominance hierarchies, your dad, mom, the dog, the kids, whatever, right? So, but in the final analysis, there ain't. It's a level playing field. And I found that fascinating. That's ancient wisdom, right? And a lot of what he said, you look back to what Aristotle wrote, not Plato so much. Plato was a lot more into the hierarchy stuff, but Seneca really got it. Seneca was like right there too, and Cato the Elder, not Cato the Younger, but Cato the Elder, I think was pretty much right there too. So that ancient wisdom that he had there was phenomenal. And people have to understand that for 10,000 years, we've been trying to find our way through this clay, and we're going to do it for another 10,000 years, and there's always going to be mysteries, right? And I think that's really exciting. And I think that what I want to do at FDIC is I want to recreate that moment where 10,000 people are quiet listening to one person's thought, and they're together in that. And no matter how crazily different they interpret it, right? Because you'll give a speech and somebody will come up to you and say, Chief, that was a really great speech, and I agree with you. The IAF needs to do X. And then another guy runs up to you and says, Chief, I agree with that whole speech, and I agree with you that the IAF needs to do the complete opposite. Why? And you're like, you're right, bro. You're right, bro. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to your point about rehearsal. I write them about a year. Like right now, I've got a couple of thoughts out there, and I write them about a year in advance, and I take them out on the road. And if people could hear the original to the one that we do, they'd laugh because the metamorphosis of them is so amazing. Like different stories come into play, or different sentences or different quotes pull me in a different direction, or this was too angry, or this wasn't angry enough, or
Right.
and so
Well, there's like an evolution then. So FDIC is kind of the culmination of kind of like I would look at as your year maybe, and you put together presentations for various other, not to diminish any of the other presentations, but it kind of evolves.
There's always one talk that I'm thinking, this is Wednesday. This is Wednesday. And that's because I give a lot of talks, but the Wednesday one is like, okay, this is Wednesday. This is what, and so this year it is, there's nothing in life worth living for unless it's worth dying for.
And it's really emotional. See, that's the thing with you, though. You understand, and this is something that I preach a lot about. It's emotion, and that's how people are engaged, and that's how people can take action. If they're not engaged emotionally, there's no connection, and therefore it's harder to have the call to action.
And I think, again, why I try to tie it into virtue is because you can easily use that for evil, and people have. You look at, I'll go back to Stahl and Pol Pot and Mao and Hitler, and you can go back in time. Even you could go all the way back to Bloody Mary, and who was a horrible human being. She was trying to move England back to Catholicism, and if you didn't agree with her, she'd kill you. Which is like, okay, that's one way to win the argument. But those people still exist, and if you don't think so, you're crazy. If you don't look around at the totalitarian nonsense going on in this country right now, it's absolutely insane. And people are obeying these people who are absolute morons. I mean, absolute morons. And there's a word in Greek called kakastrophisky, which is like an aristocracy. Although kakastrophisky is when you elect the least competent people possible to run the government. And we've managed to do that somehow, almost across the board. There's a few bright spotlights of people who aren't completely vapid, but by and large, if you take a look at like this complete jackwagon in Michigan, this Gretchen Whitmer woman, she is a complete idiot, and I'm not just, and that's not partisan politics talking. She's just an idiot. I mean, people can buy lottery tickets and marijuana, but they can't buy seeds to plant a garden. What are you? Really? How do you come up to a conclusion like that? I mean, grow up, for God's sakes. And even just people saying, oh, well, it's a virus. Well, let's lock everybody in their houses in tight spaces with poor ventilation. Yeah, that'll work to cure. What, are you kidding me? We have known forever that if a virus hits, get people out into the open air as fast as you can. The best hospitals during the 1918 pandemic were the open air tents in Kansas, for God's sakes, where the wind was blowing at 100 miles an hour every day. Don't keep them indoors. You want to get them sick and kill them? There's a plan. If you really wanted to save New York City, you should tell everybody, get the hell out of here. Go visit your relatives in South Dakota, for God's sakes. Yeah.
And this is coming from a first responder, everybody. So, this is
but
words of advice.
What did your mother tell you to do? Get out in the sunshine when you were not don't, oh my God, open the windows. So many people today live in these buildings that are hermetically sealed. The windows don't even open, which is unreal to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we're doing the wrong thing harder, right? And they also don't understand fear, which is fascinating to me, right? In other words, they use fear, but they don't understand it, right? And which I thought was really interesting. And even some of the people I really admire, like Nassim Taleb, who one of the people I really think the world of, said something the other day, and I'm like, what, are you kidding me? I was like, I never heard him say anything so incredibly wrong, just wrong from all kinds of levels. He said that people who went out in the sunshine in California or whatever to enjoy the outside should be identified, so if they get sick in the future, they can't be prioritized for treatment. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And this, I'm thinking, okay, so then anybody who drinks, we should identify because that leads to cancer and they shouldn't be able to get treatment. And anybody who, you know, drives a car that can go too fast and gets in an accident, or where does that end? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
pass moral judgment on people for that? Grow up.
Mm.
You know, people, freedom's an important piece of the puzzle because Churchill said it best. He said, Americans will eventually do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. And we've pretty much exhausted every other possibility in this current circus. And it's going to get wrapped up pretty quickly here because I think that, you know, most people are beginning to realize, yeah, ancient wisdom, let's get outside, let's exercise.
Let me ask you this. Let me
Yeah.
shift gears. Let me
You
shift
didn't
gears
want
a
to
little
go
bit.
there. You're scared of that topic.
I'm not scared of
You
that.
told me before the show not to do that. And I did it anyway, which is
No, we're open to all sides here. I think it's important to talk to people who have all different backgrounds, and I think everybody is worthy of respect, which is another like key pillar that when you give presentations, see, there's like three pillars that I look at for presenters. And if you can meet all of these, then this helps you to be successful. There's preparation, which I've already said you're probably the most prepared guy that I've ever seen. Discipline. You take this seriously, you work on it all year, and you execute flawlessly. And respect for the audience and respect for yourself and respect for your message, and to believe your message. If you don't believe your message, then your audience is not going to. So those are the three pillars for events that I think makes you successful. And I want to speak about respect. I mean, you have nothing. I mean, tell me about respect for your audience. What does that mean to you? I mean, you work with these guys, you know what I mean, and ladies. Tell me about respect to the audience, for the audience, for you.
so that's a great question, and respect is a word I think that, like a lot of words today, like culture, that get thrown around way too loosely, right? Because it has a lot to do with the whole collectivism, which is a outgrowth of Marx and Derrida and Foucault we mentioned earlier, and how people want to be grouped, right? And so the audience to me is Terry and Rob and Dan and Billy and Rick. It's not firefighters, it's the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that goes to Frankl and Seneca and all those other people. Because if you group people, they're no longer people. And so that's the problem with identity politics and identity and collectivism in general. You know, the Mayflower Compact failed catastrophically. It almost ended in cannibalism because it doesn't work. Collectivism just doesn't work. It's always about the individual, and the individual is actually about the individual. Like when I woke up this morning, I said, gosh, I wonder how today is going to affect Terry and Diane. No. I went out and said, I hope the coffee is ready for me. For me. Because I wake up, as everybody else in America does, and wonders, how's Bobby doing today? Right? I mean, no.
Right.
So if you start there by understanding that you're not talking to a group of people, you're talking to one person. And if you really believe in what you're saying, you have to be as persuasive, you have to have a good story, you have to have done that talk at least 200 or 300 times, you know, over and over, you know, in front of a mirror, not in front of a mirror, with somebody listening, without somebody listening, so that you know every word in it by heart. And then don't screw with it. Don't go off script, because that's a lack of respect. And I've seen people do that, where they'll like go off script. And I mean a formal speech. I don't mean, you know, a political talk or a rally or, you know, some off the cuff thing. If you're given a keynote or skipper's fight talk, it better be good enough at that point that you say every word as written. If you're not willing to do that, then don't take the stage, because that's a lack of respect.
Mm-hmm.
The work better be there. And so when you talk about respect, the other side of it is worldview. And we kind of joked about it earlier, that a man hears what he wants to hear, but that's okay. Because I don't know what affected your life. I don't know who you've read. I don't know what your folks were like, or your neighborhood, and all that stuff matters as you go through the world, right? And those are obviously, people laugh, but it really does matter, you know. Did you have a pony when you were a little girl, Terry? I don't know. You know, did you know what I mean? Did your mom screw up your 5th birthday? I don't know. And but it matters, right? were you popular in high school, or not? And maybe you were, maybe you weren't. You know what I mean? And so everybody's worldview matters. And so if they hear your words and think something else about it, good. And to your point about respect and practice, I'll tell you a quick story. And it's kind of an interesting story. And first year I did FDIC, the big stage, and you were there. And we practiced diligently, and a young kid came up to me and said, Chief, running back and forth on the stage like that for 25 minutes with no notes, I don't know how you did it, and that was the greatest thing I ever saw. And I said, well, I practiced a couple hundred times, and we many rewrites, and Terri and Diane are up in the thing with music and slides for me, and Rob's got lighting and practice with the teleprompters. I've got monitors and stage hands and everything that goes into it, but a lot of people help me, and I get feedback from all my dear friends, and so but thank you. And I said the next year I did my talk, and a kid ran up to me and said, Chief, that speech, you running back and forth across the stage doing that was amazing. I said, well, Terri helps me a lot, and we got teleprompters, and Rob helps me, and I've got, I do a lot of rehearsals, but thank you very much. And the third year, a kid ran up to me and he says, Chief, running back and forth on the stage like that and doing that talk with no notes, that was amazing. I said, well, I'm a gifted speaker. So I stole it off Jimmy Stewart. It's a modification of an old Jimmy Stewart thing. But the point is that, and this is important for the people who are listening to this, who are preparing to speak and preparing to take a role in society. There's a great line at the end of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which was co-opted from something that Horace Greeley said. And if you've seen the movie, it's John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart, and Jimmy Stewart gets credit for killing this bad guy and makes a career of it and ends up a senator and wealthy, but he's really killed by John Wayne, who shoots him in the background, and John Wayne's a saddle tramp and dies. Nobody knows about it. And Jimmy Stewart, as he gets older, feels guilty about it and confesses to a reporter and tells the story about the man who shot Liberty Valance. That's the story of the book and the movie. So anyway, at the end of it, the reporter goes to his publisher, who at the time was Horace Greeley, and says, what do I do? I've got this incredible story, about this legend. And Horace Greeley looks at him and says, son, when the man becomes the legend, print the legend. Which is interesting, right?
Yes.
So, one of the things about these talks is if you do them right and you understand who you're speaking to, and you love them and admire them and you want to be part of them, whether it's a sales meeting, whether it's the Daughters of the Revolution, or the Masons, or the Knights of Columbus, or the event planners convention, if you understand these people and you care about them and you put in the time, and you're going to do it so as if every word they hear they're hearing for the very first time. Don't shatter that illusion. In other words, if you're the speaker, don't shatter that illusion.
Mm-hmm.
Become the legend, right? And a lot of firefighters, when they meet me, they think, oh my gosh, Chief, you wear jeans and sit down at the dinner table like they think I'm William Wallace. They think I'm 7 foot tall and I shoot fireballs out my ass because they see these videos of me on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really just I'm a 65-year-old broken down old man, who puts on a costume every now and then and runs back and forth on the stage. But you don't shatter that illusion, right? If you decide you're going to do this, and seriously, don't do anything that would ever cause the people who enjoyed you to be disappointed. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have political views, doesn't mean you can't disagree with them or have a life. But if you decide to put yourself up there, don't get caught lying, cheating, stealing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't get caught doing those things. Don't be that guy. You know what I mean? Don't be Anthony Weiner, for God's sakes, or, especially Anthony. Don't be a person who people were looking up to who disappointed them. Don't be that guy or gal, for that matter. In other words, and if you do screw up, own it. You can screw up and still own it, right? You could, but don't go blaming, your parents didn't give you a pony when you were a kid for being a piece of garbage.
That's the important part, or one of the important parts, though, is actually owning your life and owning and being genuine to yourself and to others. I think that's an important point.
And you're not going to be perfect, Terri. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
Like I've had bad days, and we all have lives to live, and as we get older, they get tougher. And kids, pay attention to that part. They don't get easier; they get tougher.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about the golden years. My ass. The only thing that gets golden is your teeth, and that's from coffee. So the point is that life's about struggle, and the struggle gets tougher, and and as it gets closer to the end, it becomes more critical, right? And I think that also has to do with our behavior. Like back when we were children, when I was children, we would do stuff, and the world was a more forgiving place. It's not as forgiving anymore because everything's captured. And so, if you say something on Twitter or you say something on Facebook or, you say something vitriolic or bizarre, you're going to own it. And that's okay. Like I've got my own political views. I'm fiercely, conservative. I'm fiercely pro America. I'm fiercely Christian, and I'm unapologetically so. I've got no problem with that. I'll defend that to the day I die. And to a lot of people, that's a problem. They're like, oh, how can you love America? Well, leave. Go love China. See how that works out for you. You know what I mean? So, but that's me. And it doesn't make you popular. And if you're looking to be popular and being a public speaker, move on, because I've seen those people, and they're generally one-trick ponies. They're generally the name droppers, and you know what I mean? And they play for a while, but they don't have substance. The people who have substance, you read like Webster and Calhoun. If you ever really want to have some fun, pull up some of the Daniel Webster talks. Webster and Calhoun were involved in the great debate over slavery predominantly, and both of them desperately wanted to be president of the United States. And if you look at that era of time, it's fascinating because they knew Jefferson. They had heard him speak. Jefferson died during their young years, right? So they were the heirs to that. They were that second generation of statesmen, and people forget that this country almost fell apart shortly in just the third generation. We were at war, North and South, in the third generation of this country. That's why I always laugh when people say politics has never been any more divided. Well, when you start shooting your neighbor, that's a little more sporty than it is right now. We haven't gotten there yet. So, but it's always presentism, and that's okay. So my thought to people is, if you're going to speak in public, be the person that people think you are, and you're going to fall way short of it, because show me the person who hasn't told a lie, or show me the person, for goodness sakes, we look at our two front runners for the political process right now. I think we probably do better to count the times that two of them told the truth, versus how many stories they've told, which is fine, but own it, right? And so I think that be human, but be the legend. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think it takes a lot of courage, regardless of where you stand, but you do have to take. I think you have to take a stand, but that takes courage, and it takes courage to be a leader as well.
Well, I'll leave you with one final thought on that,
okay,
and then we can close with this.
All right, I'm with you.
And again, I'm Christian, so excuse the reference, but it's ancient wisdom. And remember that the Bible was built off of dozens of books before the Bible. And so if you're hung up on the fact that it's a Christian Bible, imagine that it was in the Book of Gilgamesh, or some of the Sumerian books that were before that this was built off of. But anyway, the story goes that in the rapture, God's going to come back. And it's not the God of the New Testament. It's not this like happy guy, love everybody. It's God in judgment. It's God with a sword, and he's gonna take out the people who piss them off. And so there's the people who never believed and never were on board with him, and he's cool with them. He's absolutely cool with them. And there's the people who really believed, and he's cool with them. You know who he wasn't cool with? Who he says he will vomit out of his mouth, which back in those days was like the worst thing. It was like the worst thing you could imagine. It was like total rejection. The people in the middle. People in the middle. The people in the middle, you're toast. You're worthless. You're garbage. You could be over here. You could be over here. You're in the middle. You're in a bad place. So pick a side and own it. be the legend, but, respect humanity, and don't ever expect anybody to live up to your expectation of them. It's the old joke, you don't want to meet your heroes because you find out they're just like you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's not always true. Sometimes you meet your heroes and, yeah, they're more human, but they're still your hero.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your insights. I really appreciate you being who you are and being straight with me and telling it like it is, like you always do.
So you guys can't see me, but I'm sticking my tongue out at her because
yeah, exactly.
When I was 6.
Yes, we record audio, but we can see video.
Stick their tongues out at each other?
I think they do. I think that's still a thing.
Cool.
So, if somebody wants to get in touch with you to talk with you or agree or disagree with you,
Bobby Halton at Gmail. If you want to Gmail me, my phone number, I put it out there in public. I always tell people, you want to call me, you can call me direct at 201-406-8278. That's my phone number. Be happy to talk to you.
Awesome.
And it's odd. I've been doing that for 25 years, giving out my phone number, and I think over that time I've gotten maybe 3 phone calls.
You might get more.
Yeah, no, it's just it's just the nature of people,
Yeah. Yeah. Now everybody likes to write an email, and it's less kind of
threatening,
I guess. Yes,
I had
exactly.
a neighbor the other day who was upset because somebody walked behind her house in the morning, and so she was going to go on Facebook and yell at them. And I said, the lady walks behind your house. Why don't you walk down to the fence and have a conversation with her? No, it's easier to go on Facebook and be a Facebook hero, or go on Twitter and be a tough guy. Yeah.
Well, on that note, Chief Halton, thank you for being with us today. And, I really appreciate it.
Well, Terri, terrific. I'll tell you what, that was a lot of fun. And I don't know how much we talked about events, but events, like everything else, have a personality. So if you know your industry, bring what they need, and make sure you're talking to people in a way that never insults them. The only thing I'd leave you with is that don't ever talk down. Don't say, well, I'm talking to high schoolers, so I should bring it down to their level.
Mm-hmm.
No, talk to everybody the same way, and they'll respect you for that. The minute you start to dummy stuff down, or try to bring it up,
mm-hmm.
that's inauthentic. So just be you, you know what I mean? And Terri people always say I yell when I there's a shocker. I have to listen to this. Could you imagine that? Yeah, when I get going, I get fired up. I yell, and some people love it, some people hate it, So I just tell the people that love it, keep coming, and the people who hate it, go listen to somebody else. But
Perfect.
I love you, Terri. Thank you for what you do for me.
We appreciate it, Bobby, and hopefully we get to do this again. We get to do the meeting either this year or next year, however it works out.
I got plans.
All right. We're sticking with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Terri.
Well, that's a wrap for this show. Hey, you can show us some love by subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to us. Subscribing is caring. You can also find us at eventyak.com. The opinions expressed on Event Yak are the opinions of our individual guests and not necessarily the organizations to which they're affiliated. Event Yak is a production of Moonfish Production Limited. Thank you for listening. Be kind, be safe, and stand by to stand by.